Daniel Ricciardo's Formula 1 comeback with AlphaTauri is one of the big stories of the 2023 season. But whether the story has a happy ending for the Australian and his many fans depends on what is probably the worst car on the grid for him to jump into. That's not because it's uncompetitive, although that doesn't help, but because of tricky handling characteristics that could expose some of the same weaknesses that made his 2 years at McLaren, that glorious victory at Monza in 2021 aside, a failure. That McLaren was willing to pay Ricciardo, who had a contract for 2023, millions not to race so it could replace him with Oscar Piastri means his F1 stock is at an all-time low. But the opportunity to return to F1 mid-season in place of the ousted Nyck De Vries means Ricciardo now has the chance to re-establish himself as an F1 star. The question is, will the AlphaTauri AT04 allow him to? AlphaTauri is last in the Constructors' Championship and has, on average, the 9th fastest car on single lap pace, just ahead of Alfa Romeo. In the last 3 race weekends, its cars haven't once escaped Q1. That in itself isn't a problem for Ricciardo in terms of making an impression. While it might make it difficult to achieve good on-paper results, he can be judged based on how much he's getting out of a limited package. If 15th on the grid is as good as the car can manage, then that's as good as taking pole position in a Red Bull. But Ricciardo might have been better off in the Alfa Romeo, which is the other contender for worst car on the grid right now. It may lack downforce and therefore pace, but both Valtteri Bottas and Zhou Guanyu have been complimentary about how well balanced it is. The AlphaTauri is a trickier beast. Since the start of 2023, its weakness has been rear-end instability in the late entry phase for slower corners. That then transitions to understeer in the middle of the corner. In an interview with the race earlier this year, De Vries characterised this as an open balance. The problem is rooted in the challenge of ensuring there is consistent performance through a wide range of ride heights, with the AlphaTauri struggling in slower corners when the rear ride height is at its highest. Some progress has been made to ameliorate the problem, and one of the specific targets of the major Silverstone upgrade that included a new floor was tackling that. The team was happy that the upgrades correlated well with simulations, but accepted the gains weren't enough to move the car up the grid. And neither driver was delighted with the impact on the handling characteristics. The reason this could be a problem for Ricciardo is that there were times when a similar instability made life for him difficult at McLaren, and if he can't have confidence in the AlphaTauri, then there's the risk that the troubles of 2021 and 2022 could repeat themselves. Ricciardo's problems at McLaren were rooted in what he described as the peculiar characteristics of the cars. He's not unusual in that view, with teammate Lando Norris and predecessor Carlos Sainz both making similar observations. It's just that they dealt with the limitations far better than Ricciardo did. It wasn't for want of trying on Ricciardo's part. He worked diligently to adapt his driving style to a counterintuitive one, but never got on top of the car. It proved particularly difficult in 2022, with the change to new ground effect regulations. Ricciardo's troubles were rooted in the corner entry characteristics of the 2021 and 2022 McLarens. The exact problem shifted between seasons, but he struggled to attack the corners aggressively enough to get decisive turn-in and get the car into the turn positively. The upshot was that Ricciardo often suffered from under-rotation, elongating the corner and meaning he was traction limited for longer than Norris. Effectively, the longer you have steering lock on, the harder it is to get the power down and launch off the corner. Therefore, a problem at turn-in was leading to significant time loss. This would generally either be instability or understeer dialed in to offset that instability. In an interview with The Race, Norris suggested the main reason he comprehensively outperformed Ricciardo was that he was better able to deal with the car when it's on a knife edge. He characterised the 2022 McLaren as particularly inconsistent and prone to slipping off that knife edge. In an inconsistent, difficult-to-drive car, Ricciardo was a shadow of the driver he was before and contributed just 35% of McLaren's points during those 2 years. So does this mean Ricciardo is doomed? No, far from it. The AlphaTauri is a different car with different limitations, and it may be that provided it gives Ricciardo confidence on that initial turn-in before the instability sets in, he can deal with it. The key to his driving has always been tremendous confidence on corner entry under braking, a style honed in his first stint with the team in its Toro Rosso guys, and the car might give him that before the problems set in. We simply don't know. But it's impossible to be sure, and even Ricciardo himself won't know until he gets some experience in the car. One of the challenges the AlphaTauri drivers have grappled with is working out the best trade-off to deal with those limitations, and it might be that Ricciardo can find an effective way to make the best of it. Either way, the Hungaroring will be a revealing place to start given the track is dominated by low and medium speed corners. And Ricciardo will see this as an opportunity, as if he can prove himself in a tricky to drive car, it will better exorcise the ghosts of the McLaren years, both for him personally and the watching world. After leaving McLaren, Ricciardo had to rebuild. That process began in Red Bull's simulator. As Red Bull team principal Christian Horner revealed earlier this year, the post-McLaren Ricciardo was initially unrecognisable from the brilliant driver who had turned down an offer to stay with the team for 2019. But he soon readapted and has made a useful contribution as simulator driver. Ricciardo also drove the 2023 Red Bull RB19 during the post-British Grand Prix tyre test. While any rumours about lap times and performance should be taken with a pinch of salt, given he was running to Pirelli's programme, he clearly did at least a good job. But the decision to throw him in at AlphaTauri in place of De Vries was made before that test, rather than as a result of it. Ricciardo has spoken of the value of what he describes as his 6 months off, albeit only in general terms. It's possible that part of this process was learning from the way he attempted to overhaul his driving style to suit the capricious McLaren. That could perhaps impact his desire to approach getting behind the wheel of the AlphaTauri AT04 with an open mind. As he put it in an interview with F1.com, "I don't want to get too many preconceived ideas." Ricciardo will be well aware of the known weaknesses of the car, but he's hoping that its main vice will simply be a lack of downforce and therefore grip, but that it's a relatively benign car. If it feels relatively balanced, that's something I can work with, is his view. Given the consistency of the feedback of Tsunoda and De Vries and Pierre Gasly last year, that's perhaps an optimistic view, but it encapsulates Ricciardo's approach. When he gets behind the wheel for the first time, he clearly wants to rely on his feeling about the car. Then he can deal with finding ways to improve it. By getting into the car for the double header at the Hungaroring and Spa before the summer break, Ricciardo effectively has a free hit to feel his way back in and see what he can get out of the car. He characterises his approach as about having fun with more right foot than left, and all about having a good time. And that point is particularly important, because if there's one thing that was very clear about much of Ricciardo's 2-year stint with McLaren, he was definitely not enjoying himself. Formula One is a cutthroat business, and there's no doubt that Ricciardo has an eye on the possibility of a return to Red Bull racing as Max Verstappen's teammate. Sergio Perez is under contract for 2024 and a change seems unlikely, but given he has failed to make it to Q3 6 times out of 10 this season and managed only a 50% podium hit rate despite being in the best car, pressure is building. Ricciardo will be well aware of this, and while he's not openly saying he's gunning for Perez's seat, any driver in his position would be. And late last season, he ruled out driving for a team down the grid on the basis that it would be better to target a front-running seat for 2024. Given the Red Bull connection, AlphaTauri is the next best thing, as there's a potential route into a winning car. Ricciardo is an 8-time Grand Prix winner, one who has never had a shot in a championship challenging car, so if there's even a slight chance of getting into one, of course he's going to chase it. In his F1.com interview, he likened his position to the one he was in when he climbed through Red Bull's junior ranks on his way to winning F1 races with Red Bull from 2014 to 2018. He characterised that as being in a situation where Red Bull says if you get results, we'll keep pushing you. That means his mindset is clearly to do well at AlphaTauri and make the next step. So what constitutes doing well at AlphaTauri? Ricciardo has set his sights on trying to get into the top 10, which is where AlphaTauri has been at its best. That's only happened occasionally, with Tsunoda's pair of 10th places the peak, although he did finish 9th on the road in Spain before being hit with a penalty. The key for Ricciardo is to extract the most out of the car and outperform teammate Tsunoda. Doing so isn't a given, as the car has been tricky to drive and Tsunoda has had a strong, if low profile, season. But Ricciardo is determined to hit the ground running and apply all the lessons of his time on the sidelines. Ricciardo has much to prove, but he has a superb F1 CV and his McLaren struggles were the exception rather than the norm in his successful Grand Prix career. If he could gel with the AlphaTauri AT04, he will thrive, which is why his compatibility with arguably the worst car in the field will make or break his comeback.